Or is good for you? Okay, great. Hello, everyone. It's good to have you here. Thanks so much. My name's Stephen. Welcome to our panel talk together in eMotion. I have the pleasure of introducing this wonderful group of people, and it's strange for me because I've known them for a few years, so I get to big them up with their proper profiles. So I'll start with who they are. In the near middle is Sarah, the blonde one, Sarah McLeod. She has an extensive experience in working in the entertainment industry. And for over 20 years, she's been a casting director, an actress, a voiceover artist, a teacher, producer, including playing, I might add, Rosie Cotton from Lord of the Rings, in the world-famous Lord of the Rings. She's proud to have been at the helm of Big Mouth Voices since 2011, and she values working closely with voices and clients to ensure everyone is getting the best experience possible. Sarah's been involved in casting a number of local New Zealand games, including Path of Exile, Balloons, Agent Intercept, and with a team of innovators, Sarah is taking Big Mouth Voices into a new era, both within New Zealand and globally. Gemma Laurel, to my right, is an Australian actor having voiced over 30 video games with award-winning studios around the world, including voicing games trailers and characters in games such as Warframe, Path of Exile, Warhammer 40k, Last Epoch, and EVE Online. As a gamer herself for over 20 years, Gemma appreciates the importance of character development, acting performance, and its impact on a game's immersive potential. Paul Fox, over to the right, is a 20-plus year creative professional. Paul's passion is to help bring stories and worlds to life through artistic use of sound and technology. A top-notch sound designer, I might add, and supervisor. He is the founder of New Zealand's own Sound Creature Interactive. He's also an experienced voice director, actor, and a lifelong music performer and creator. Paul has worked at world-class studios such as Sony PlayStation, Warner Brothers, Naughty Dog, and Activision, with his most recent project, Dread Hunger, winning the 2022 PAVS Slice of Heaven Grand Prize Award. Nice. You can see we're in good company here. Jeremy Birchall in the middle. My good friend Jeremy has been working as a voice director, tutor, and voice artist in the film, television, broadcast, and gaming industry for many years, working with such production houses as Disney, ABC, Pacific Renaissance, Stars, and Grinding Gear Games. Jeremy enjoys the process of the synergy between the creative logistics and mechanics in gaming, and takes pride in facilitating these departments coming together and creating new immersive worlds for the ultimate player experience. And then this is where it gets weird.
You talk about yourself.
I now talk about me. So I'm Stephen Brunton. I'm a Kiwi actor. Woo! Thank you, thank you. No, more, no, stop. And I've been a voice artist as well for many years. I've been working professionally since 1998. His voice work includes a wide range of commercials, dramas, narrations, and video games. In the voiceover industry, he's best known for voicing monster characters in Power Rangers, as well as roles in games like Balloons, Path of Exile. Stephen has a wealth of knowledge and experience, and I don't know how to talk about myself. I love being challenged with a multitude of characters and situations, and I just feel honoured to be here in such good company. Please put your hands together for these lovely people, but most importantly for me. Thank you. I mean these people. Right. Now, our title is Together in eMotion. We didn't rip off the conference title at all. But of course, eMotion, right? Because voiceover. So in this talk, we're going to present an in-depth look at how voice actors add to the immersive nature of games and engage players emotionally. As game developers, how are you going to add emotion to your story? Voice, we believe, is a valuable component of your game. How do you get it right? So we're going to cover off pre-production, production, post-production, and please, we're good with the QR code, right?
We are still working in progress. I think it'll be over to those guys if they've updated the slides.
We have an updated slide coming through with a QR code that you can tap on and get a bunch of resources from our chat today, including contracts and other useful things that'll help you as you get your ducks in a line to make the things that we're talking about happen smoothly in your game development. So, if I may hand it over now to Sarah, who's going to be our panel wrangler, topic keeper, and a presentation clicker. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. Right, let me just zoom in my screen so I can see what I'm saying. Okay, so you are wondering, you're going to get started writing for your game. What are the key elements to writing for your game? I'll hand over to Paul.
Yeah, I haven't checked my mic yet, and I don't think it's working. Is it? Hello?
Can we hear him?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so, I mean, ideally, if you're making something that is going to require voice acting, the first thing is just to have an idea of your story arc, and before you do any writing, you might write some lines to get started with that, but we need an idea of what the story is, what's the location, what's the time period, and that naturally leads into the characters. And one of the things I like to always try and do in games I work on is to get an idea of who the characters are as quickly as possible, and start building a structure that includes the age, accent, general affect, mood that the character is in, or the range. And I actually have a template sheet I've come up with over the years to help kind of tickle the process and remind myself of what's good to have. And then having that information, those two things would lead naturally into the writing process, getting the script down, and starting to get into having the actual lines the characters would perform. So I'm not a writer myself, but I do get involved in what I call dialogue, which is taking stuff that's been written and maybe tuning it better for what actually plays in the game based on how the game flows, because you find that getting from the actual written stuff to what you're doing in game can sometimes things get a little out of whack. Am I forgetting something?
So who does write the scripts? Like, is it a collaboration? Like, what's the normal process?
So, like, for instance, on Dread Hunger, we don't have an enormous amount of dialogue, which is the most recent project I've been working on. And in that case, when we do need characters to say things, our creative director, game director, is the one that generally would do the bulk of the writing. And he tends to be somebody that's pretty good at, he just goes, I just need him to say this, this, and this, and he writes it out, and it's pretty good first pass, and that's generally what we start with. Now, we might get into this a little later, but there's a point where you want to have maybe a variation on certain lines for status and stuff, but I think we'll talk about that later. So, but the initial pass, you kind of just want to get what are the key things you need characters saying when, if you're that far along. I mean, again, we're in pre-production here. It's hard to kind of confine what I'm talking about to one thing, but I will. Because in pre-production, there's not a lot to do, I guess, yet with this. But eventually, as your game comes together and as you are creating scenes and moments, you're going to need more of that. If you're a small developer, obviously, you're going to be writing that stuff yourself. But if you look at the full spectrum of game development and size of productions, we're going to talk today about what's done at the AAA level all the way down to things you can do as an indie. And I don't want to keep harping on that, but I feel like if it sounds like we're talking about AAA level stuff, one takeaway from this should be that you can steal ideas from those production methods to use even if you're a solo developer. There's good ideas I hope you can pick up from what we're talking about today. So
yeah, so we sort of like today's all about talking about how you can get the best out of your voice actors. So starting with writing good dialogue. So Jeremy, is there a specific way to write dialogue for a game, and who are you writing for?
Yes.
There is. What is that specific way, Jeremy?
Oh, okay. Was not a close question. Okay. Well, I think good question, and it is to establish first what the game is. Like, who are you writing for? And we kind of want to make money, I suppose. It's in a development stage, or it's in a beta stage, and it's in a where it's going to find its settling ground. But there might be a sandbox, they might be a real-time, strategy game, shooter game, or a multiplayer, or an RPG game like Path of Exile, which I work on, which is quite a big expanding game, and it's been expanding since 2006, and it keeps expanding that world. And so understanding that is really important, who your target market is. And therefore, then you start the process of the lore, that's L-O-R-E. And this is, some people love this. Writers love the lore of their games, and they're very precious about their lore. And it is really, really important, because it can, like a game like Path of Exile, the lore is so grand, it's so great. And we've had many writers come through the process and add to that lore, and then more have added to it, and then we've got a whole cultural thing going on with different cultures. So yeah, the lore is really important, and then of course feeding into that is something that Paul and I have talked about, and that terminology is the designer dialogue, which is the perfunctory dialogue or the quest queues, where you might arrive at an NPC and they'll give you some information to move on to the next thing. So we call that like designer dialogue, correct? You know, that's sort of, yeah.
Yeah, that's we keep talking about. We've been talking about this stuff before we got here, and yeah, one interesting thing in game development that you'll notice if you work on more than one game is that there are games where somebody's written the story, and in an ideal world, you write the story and then you make the game that represents the story. But that never works out that way in game development, because you're making a game that also needs to be engaging to players, and the story may not be sufficient to do that, because you need a game that's actually fun to play. And depending on the type, I mean, there's so many genres of games involved with dialogue that I don't want to try to cover everything. But the simple way to put it is, when we say designer dialogue, in my mind, designer dialogue is the kind of writing that happens when a game designer is creating a moment in the game, and that moment needs characters to say things so that the player has correct awareness of what's happening in the game there. And so it's designer dialogue. It's functional. It's needed to ensure that the experience is complete and understandable. When you've already done the writing for the game, you may have to, as a writer, find a way to fit what that character says in that moment into the lore of the game or into the overall story arc. And I don't have any good examples right now, but occasionally you run into big challenges with that. How do we fit this in? But there's good writers also that I've worked with on teams who always seem to be able to just figure something out to fit it in there. And it's kind of frustrating because it feels a little bit shoehorned in the sense of, you know, it feels backwards sometimes if you think, well, a writer should just write the story, and then, you know, I think I've already said that, but the idea that the game needs to drive the creative process is really what it comes down to. So
yeah, it's a different engine in the way that we would consider it, rather than a film or television, so way of telling a narrative. So concision is really important, being concise with your dialogue. So not saying too much. You know, engaging with the player so that we've got a bit of lore, but we've got a bit of, you know, important developer dialogue there, and that drives us forward. And then also character above all else, you know, those NPCs, those non-player characters, how they have a life and they bring people in. Because, I mean, we're two kind of players. We've got people that just want to loot and they want to kill and that sort of stuff. But therefore, those interesting characters that we might meet along the way, immerse us in that world, and that's that beautiful synergy between writer, director, and engineer as well, because of course they can give a cool effect on it, on the voice, and then the voice actor obviously as well, and bringing that to it. There you go.
So very interesting and critical, because it's also designer dialogue. Is that what can also be called critical dialogue?
No, I think when I hear the term critical dialogue, that is more. I mean, designer dialogue could fall into that category, but principal or critical dialogue is things that characters say that are part of the main storyline. So that's kind of getting more into the territory of when we were starting to talk about ambient dialogue versus barks versus efforts, which was,
Shall we? Yeah, so let's talk a bit about that then.
Yeah, so we thought, what's a cool way to do this? Because, you know, we can just be talking heads, but we can give you some examples. Like, I thought ambient dialogue, we might actually set up a little example of what this might be in a recording session. And this is like the background people in your game. You know, you go to a village, or you might, a great example that Paul and I were talking about was Grand Theft Auto, where you go through that world and you get these snippets of different segments of whether it's LA or, you know, like.
And yeah, it's stuff that it's okay if you don't hear the entire line. You just hear bits and pieces of people saying stuff that kind of builds up the ambiance of the world, and it feels like you're in a place because people are saying things that match the neighborhood you're in. It's really cool how they put a lot of work into that into those games.
Let's do it. Okay, so
do it.
Okay. We're going to simulate a recording booth over here, but. So we'll all be actors, but we'll do a medieval village, a village, maybe in a fishing village, and it's Yeah, let's start with that, and we'll do it in English first. So, and then I'll explain what hubbub or walla or international language is. So we'll do on the fourth invisible pip. So 3, 2, 1.
Right,
I only do that.
Full catch today.
Yeah.
Big
Oh
net.
no, I couldn't got that kind
I
of.
don't think we can.
Good.
Oh, maybe.
I'm over here. Let's move it.
All right then. Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, I don't know why they do it. Maybe we should. Possibly.
Glasses.
Do you think we can get one?
We can do. So that example, we can multi-layer that to create a bigger world if we need to, or keep it quite sparse if we wanted to, if there's just a few people. Sometimes with different segments of the world, they might require something that's less specific, and we might call that hubbub or walla or international walla, and it's kind of gibberish. And then you can put a Spanish language or another region on top of it. So we'll give you an example of that. Same thing. 3, 2, 1.
Ska man ej. Har du ska bort? Visst nie. Węsku mono. Ale co masz? Ale co masz? Nasz na bak. Drinks more?
So yeah, that's an example of that, and that's really useful if you're wanting to just keep it non-specific.
Sounds a bit like Sims.
Yeah, it does sound a bit like Sims. Okay, so something else we thought barks. What do we do?
You're going to get Steve to do
Oh
that.
yeah, you do the barks. Yeah. So
We're going to do battle cries as well.
oh yeah, we can do a battle cry.
Yeah.
Yeah. A battle cry. Okay, yeah.
Hope you got your phones recording. Free here.
So this is going to be a little bit more dynamic vocally, okay? One thing we do a lot kind of in Path of Exile is a lot of battle cries and running into battle. So we'll do this sort of thing. So we're heading towards the enemy, and then I'll point to a few people, and then you're going to probably die by impaling or, like something like that. Type. Right. Yeah, same thing. 3, 2, 1. And you would just layer that as big as the battle you want. So
We'll say this tip later on as well, but when you're running a voiceover session, leave those parts of the session to the end.
Yeah.
Just as a little side tip.
Yeah.
Leave the vocal cords at the end.
And tell the voice actor that you're going to do it, because they've got to the end and they're like, you want what?
Yeah. My vocal cords
I
are on
don't
the
do
floor.
that. My voice is my profession.
So what about barks?
Yeah, so the barks are...
Can I just say something funny here? I don't know, was anyone here last year on our panel when it was Steve and I and Gemma was in Sydney connecting remotely? Because of course we're learning as well. And last year at the very end of the Q&A, someone asked us about barks, and Stephen and I were up here going, woof, woof, woof.
Nice.
And I said to
Very
Steve,
convincingly.
and I said to Steve, I bet you barks is actually a real term, but now we know what it is. So we've learned.
Try and be as concise about this as I can, but the barks are, they aren't usually, they can be NPCs, but they're usually the supporting characters around them, like guards or, smaller characters that can inform potentially to the player something that's happening. So an example would be maybe if a guard would see the player and it's heading towards the player, but then the player puts a cloak on and all of a sudden they go into stealth mode, and then you would hear a bark out from maybe a guard or something. It would be,
Oi, where'd he go?
yeah, he's gone invisible or something like that. It's obviously too precise. It's got to be much more clever than that. Also,
That's kind of
hello.
Earlier we were talking about that, how initially those are just like status messages. Like if you're on the game design side of that, these are basically states.
Yeah.
And so our job as, I guess, the creative voice team, including writers and actors and everyone in between, is to reduce the effect of it just sounding like a status message if we really want to give it like a nice creative touch. And so, in earlier days of game development, you would have characters that would have one thing they say for a status message sometimes, and you start to notice that it gets a bit repetitive. So one challenge is writing variations, and that was another thing earlier that I liked that we were talking about how they don't necessarily need to always say the thing that they're becoming aware of. Like, you don't have to spell it out. Like, that's your first, the first thing that comes to mind, you'll write something like that.
Oh, I'm scared.
Yeah, or, there he is. You can say, oh, enemy over there, if it's a military game. But, what are some other things people do with their voices if they notice things? And knowing that if you have, let's say you have 6 enemies and they're all going to be firing off status messages, they don't all need to spell it out at the same time. Some of them can just go, hey, and you hear that particular hey, and as a player you get used to that particular hey meaning they see me. So
and what I like about it is it's like sometimes it's not visually led, it's audio led, so you could hear that audio first before you see visual. So yeah,
and the way they say hey, if the actor who delivered the hey was directed to you're saying hey because you just saw this guy that everybody's been looking for. There's this unconscious, you pick that up in the delivery. They're going to say hey in a different way than if I don't know, if you stole a lady's purse and she says hey, it might sound a little different.
Yeah, I think this is going to become massive with VR. Like, you can imagine like it happening behind you and it's like, whoa, geez. Yeah.
So what about efforts?
Oh yeah, so efforts, these are something that we might grab at the end of the session. They're pretty cool for your libraries if you're building audio libraries in regards to attacks or defensive stuff. So I'll give it. You might want to stand up if that helps you. I can direct you sitting down. But some examples, like if we understand how the character might have a weapon, like could be a short sword. So we want to get maybe, because in your randomizers we can use all these sounds. We're going to get maybe, we'll start with half a dozen of like short attack sounds with a short sword, Yeah, that's great. And then then the voice actor would say to me, "I was like, did you get enough?" And I was like, "There's never enough. I'll take as many as you can give me because it's awesome for the player experience." But then it's quite hard to get the difference between an offensive sound to a defensive sound. So she's going to now be attacked or hurt. So, yeah, and through this session of efforts, we might do running efforts that can go from walking to jogging to running, and therefore screams. It's quite interesting. Yeah, do you know the difference between falling off a cliff and being thrown off a cliff? That's, like, whoa!
Are you happy to be thrown off a cliff?
Yeah.
Horrified.
People, I always say, suicide screams, what are those? And they're like, that is running into battle and being impaled on a sword or a spike. So can you do that one? And it's sort of like it's gargly, like it's really bloody. Yeah, it's sort of, and those are really, really cool, those guttural sounds. So
we had a voice actor who was in an isolation hotel recording for Jeremy, doing these kind of quite full-on efforts, and the security guard came up and knocked on the door to make sure, are you okay in there?
Yeah, as we're talking about Source Connect and you can record people in their homes and stuff like that, you go, okay, your time zone's 4 a.m, you're about to sound like you're getting murdered. Is there anybody around you? So yeah, that's what we classify as kind of efforts.
And all the efforts start sounding like you're in the bathroom having a terrible time after a while. But I had one that was really fun. This is where getting specific in dialogue is really helpful. I had to vomit as my character because she was wandering the desert and was dehydrated. So the director was asking for, get some vomit sounds. And it got down to the specific of how chunky do you want the vomit? And it's really an interesting question because, I mean, if you're dehydrated, it's probably not going, you're going to be at the bile stage, So yeah, you're dry. So, but we did do some alternatives for fun. Literally it's just putting water in your mouth, and then it's amazing how awful that can sound just splashing out into a bowl in front of a microphone. But it's a lot of fun, but disgusting.
I just want to add to that, like, this is an inside thing that I've done quite a bit of TV stuff where it's like R16 stuff, and there's not much sound difference between someone fighting and someone making love. So done a few of those sessions, and you go, oh, I could use the same things, really.
Depends what you're into. Right?
Yeah, it depends. I don't know if that's the kind of game you're making. So, and I think obviously stating that the other kind of audio we're going to grab is the NPC stuff or the bosses. The boss might be your mega power person that you're going to end at the fight at the end of the challenge, and that could be you've done some bosses, have you?
I have.
What's a good line?
Now you will die.
Yeah, and you do those really, really quick, and you will die. Time. So those are really.
How dare you approach me?
Yeah. So that's what we call boss. Yeah.
So you've got a good idea now of the different ways, different types of voiceover that you're going to be recording. How can you make sure that what you've written is actually going to make good dialogue?
So, well, sorry, feedback. Sorry, I'm having a bit of allergies today. And I'm trying to talk. Which leads naturally into the thing I'm going to say, which is when you hear the written lines out loud, you will often realize some things about what you've written, and so it's good to do. It's especially good if you're hiring an actor who's going to be, you're paying a rate for somebody to be in a booth and maybe a recording studio as well. It depends on how you go. You might find somebody at home recording, but before you get to that point where you're spending your budget, there's things you can do on your own to make sure that your writing is ready to record. And so my favorite way to approach it is if I have to, I'll record my own voice reading lines, and I will get them set up in the game and playing where they're supposed to if the game is at that stage. And that gives you a lot of information. It gives you a sense of timing, because when the lines play in the game, there's all sorts of things that timing is important for, and so if the line happens just before a big event in the game, maybe the line turns out to be too long because there's an explosion that happens right when the person's still talking. You also will start to see, aside from your writing stuff, you'll start to see maybe some technical needs that need to be addressed in terms of the way the voices are playing. And getting that stuff handled ahead of time makes it nice that when later you get the actual actor in the booth and recording, get that stuff into your game, you're just dropping it in and it plays. And so it's good to get a head start by getting, some teams like to use synthetic voice. I never like using synth voice, but it's another way to get temp voices into your game.
But I reckon even more than the temp voices, like, because you guys in this, so being in the audience in this panel, I'm imagining you're sort of at the point of developing games that do incorporate voice actors, and we really want to help you with that. So we have so many voice actors that would love to probably get on a Zoom and do a table read with your game or do a scratch track for you, because that enables you to hear your script potentially read out by actors for the first time. And I think particularly like if you're sort of starting out in that area, then reach out, just send me an email, but totally happy to help you in that area. So then that could be a benefit rather than using a synthetic voice.
Yeah, and a table read is literally like you sit in a conference room if you're a company, or a Zoom, but it's the idea. It doesn't even have to be actors. It can just be people on your team, and each person picks a character to read on a script, and you perform scenes together. If it's a scene where there's different characters talking to each other, that's another way to work out timing and issues, and wording issues come up that you didn't realize when you're reading it. But yeah, that's also cool. Another thing is I like sometimes when I get auditions, our script is far enough along that the auditions are actual lines that are ready to play in the game. And you got to be careful with this. I only do this if it's internal only, but if I have an audition that we know we like and we are going to hire the actor, sometimes it's a good morale thing to get those lines playing somewhere in the game, or at least make a video if I don't put it in the game, and I'll send it to the team so they can hear the voice of the actual actor we've got. It kind of helps to spawn ideas of how they're going to be in the game and maybe other stuff we're going to write. When you hear the actual voice instead of just written, it really does change how you think about it. So
what are some common traps that can happen when you're writing?
Right, I'll give you a couple of examples. One's forced law, and that is like writers can get really addicted to the lore, and you're trying to do your designer dialogue, and you're getting so much lore in there, and it's like, what am I meant to do? And so don't force that law. And at the end of the day, it's a sad thing to say that probably 95% of your players don't care, but there are people that do care. And then the ones that do remind you about it and then put it up on Reddit. And then everyone starts like chatting about, no, that's not how it was said. And it's like, okay. And then the other one is anachronistic language. And that is, we don't want to, if you've got a game that is like a Lord of the Rings game or a Game of Thrones kind of world or something like that, that's how it's meant to sound. Those characters come from there. So if you're writing, doth, go over there and do that and do this and that and one with therefore and that sort of stuff. If you put a character in there that doesn't sound like it's in that world, unless it's intentional, a time traveler or something like that. But making sure, sometimes if writers are coming in and out and they're changing it, they're not keeping up to speed with the writing and how it sort of keeps within that world. So that's a couple of pitfalls, I think.
We've got to speed it up, guys. We're running out of time.
Okay, cool. I'll speed it up.
So,
just love ourselves talking. So.
okay, so there was a lot to cover off in dialogue, in writing. Casting. So, what I want to say is don't be scared of auditions. Most platforms do them for free. Like, at Big Mouth, we offer auditions for free because it's a really great opportunity for you to actually hear the voices from the commercial reel or the gaming reel. You may not be able to tell if they're right to cast. So, auditions, there's lots of different places you can go to get the auditions, and generally they are free. So very quickly, guys, how do you find voice actors to audition? How many do you audition? How do you choose what part of the script you're going to ask them to read?
Do I go?
You can go, yep.
Like I said, if I had the character bio and sample lines, I have a few resources of places I can go to find actors. And like Sarah says, this is a free thing, and there's a concept of a self-tape audition, which means you're not worrying about the quality necessarily, although it does kind of matter. I would definitely, as an actor, want to deliver as high a quality audition, even if it's a self-tape, as I can. But it's generally understood. There's sometimes it's just somebody on their phone. But the good news is that you can get lots and lots of auditions. That's also the bad news because it means you have to sit there and listen through a lot of stuff. And I find that some of my clients, I'd rather not burden them with that. I can say, look, would you like to listen to all 100 of these actors that we got auditioning for this part? It's cool because they're reading the lines you actually wrote and trying to be the character. But what I tend to try to do as a dialogue coordinator in this role is that I listen through myself, and there's some that are easy to just kick out. Now, like we're casting for a 10-year-old boy, and this man is reading in a man voice. I don't know why he even auditioned for this, so he's gone. And I whittle it down to what I think the good choices are, and I might put my favorite 3 or 5 in front of the director and let the director tell me which one do you like. And if he doesn't like any of them, go back and find some more. And anyway, I think that covers it.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, cool. And what about from the actor's point of view? Like, so Steve, what sort of do you do as an actor in terms of setting up to record for an audition?
Okay, well, there's a couple of answers that sort of tie into that. One is technically, and one is sort of the emotional preparation. To cover off technically, I use the best equipment I can. I've got my own home studio, and it's wall-to-wall carpet with all the kind of acoustic sound deadening stuff required for a professional result. Because while I know that in some cases, as Paul said, people have put through iPhone type recordings and sent it through, and I know Jeremy has cast some great roles off auditions like that. I personally have to have really solid recordings that are just a little bit post-produced, are refined for the best takes, and just a touch of sound editing to sort of say to you, I'm a good choice, pick me because you can trust me technically. Emotionally, we're going to want to have as much about that character as you can give me about its who it is, where it is, what it's doing, the why behind the things that you're asking to see in that audition. That informs me about it, so that about him or her, so I can breathe life into this character. If I look at it and I see very little written in the brief, I have to assume that maybe you don't care so much. Maybe this character is just performing a few functions and there's expositional dialogue to just say a couple of things. But if you've taken the time and the care to say this is what drives this character and why they're here in the moment, and you've given me references and a YouTube link to another one that's sort of a archetypal look-like of something that this is going to inform me, I've got so much to work with. I can breathe life into it. And that helps.
And what's showing up there is in the resources. So it's something that's going to be available for you guys to have a look at. Right. So what about the impact of timelines on the casting?
Yeah, in our
Keep
world,
to them, or do they expand?
they're really quick in my world, and I get lots of really information sort of right up to the last minute. So,
And I guess also with COVID, we've ended up transitioning really easily to having so many voices now available to record from home.
yeah, so before COVID, I would see 80% voices. I used to audition people in the recording studio and get like quite a lot. But now I record probably 80% people online and see maybe 20% in a recording studio now. So things have changed, and getting on board with that technology is amazing.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's going to open up your world.
And because it's technical information, we've actually also put a spec sheet in around how a voiceover artist can record well from home on their phone or from their home studio. But we've gone down to the specifics of like what you want to have the settings at when you're doing the recordings. But that's going to be one of the resource codes that you'll be able to access at the end. So just quickly, I also just want to talk about contracts, because obviously contracts is a really important part of the process. We are still working on the contract that's going to be available as part of the resources, but the basic idea is that the contract is to protect everybody. It's to protect, the game's IP, confidentiality and privacy, termination if things aren't going quite right. But yeah, you've just got to remember that the contracts are protecting everybody, and you have your base that's going to cover the usage, the territory, the platforms the game's going to be played on, any extras, like if there's extra recording that's required from the actor, recording session variables, if it's going to be a 4-hour maximum or a 3-hour minimum, those sorts of logistics. If it's buyout, because most obviously of the time the game is a buyout, if there are going to be any points or royalties as part of the process, like maybe it's a point system where there's no money at all and it's going to be a point system in terms of that's going to be the payment. And then rates are dictated by the size of the role, how well known the actor is, where you've cast them from, how long you need them for. So we're going to create a guide that allows a really nice template for you guys to use as game developers to make the contracting side of things easy, clear, but with good terms in place.
I just want to add just quickly that if you engage with agent or agents with a contract, you'll get a lot more goodwill from them as you build that relationship. That's what I found working with you.
Yeah, because everybody wants to know what the parameters are. I mean, we all need to know that. It's helpful. So then moving on to production. Okay, so you've written your script, you've cast your actors, and you're ready to record your voice actors. How do you ensure that you're going to have a successful recording session?
So, well, you need a script. Yeah, and you need.
Does the script change sometimes?
Yeah, it does. And sometimes, like I just did a league, and I was online, and I said to the writer, "Can I print the script?" And this is like 10 minutes beforehand, and so that's always in development, straight up to that. So having that, ideally, if you have the information for the voice artist and the studio in place early enough, you're going to get cheaper. It's going to be cheaper because as less time that you spend in the studio being very precise about what you want, then you'll have more time to play potentially in the improvisational stage of things if you need to develop that character. So having that in place is important. Contracts and then the studio connection. So if you're going to connect one studio to another studio through Source Connect, make sure that all those time zones, if you're communicating with LA or London or New Zealand, you've got all that stuff set in place.
And another thing regarding Source Connect, so say for example you are using underground sound here in Wellington and you've cast an actor over in the UK, often the studio will be happy to do a test the day beforehand, so you're not fluffing around doing that in the session, and they often don't charge for that. They're just sort of like, yep, we'll make sure the production's all going, all the testing's being done. So you're ready to sort of start the hour that you might have allocated for the performance side of things, because the technical side of things has already been resolved.
I think it also bears mentioning the opportunity to send out a script a day ahead at least to your actors might make for a really good read through where no surprises, because your actors will want to turn up prepared, so give them the chance to give you the best they can.
So Paul, tell me about the way that you sometimes keep track of all the takes that are being recorded in the session.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to get through this quickly because we're running out of time. But if you look at the lower end of that slide, those lines where they're saying you're just adding to the body count, that's an example of my ideal script setup in a session, because you'll notice the line is to the left, and then there's a takes column, a selects column, and an alts column. There's nothing alts there, but what happens is during a more full-blown session, there'll be an engineer running the recording, and then there'll be someone else who's marking takes. So each time the actor reads the line,
I'm sorry, better.
We're on take 6 of that first line. Well, that first line is take 6. Each take is a different line, or we might do multiple takes for one line, but anyway, take 6 is a full run of the recorder and results in a single audio file. ABC means the actor delivered the line 3 times. So they said, you're just adding to the body count 3 times. Then they hit stop. That's a single file. Now, the reason I like to work this way, and this is a common way of working, is because this goes down the pipeline into how the voices get edited. And you can quickly blow your budget up if you just record a bunch of lines and don't have anything systemic in place to handle the editing portion, because you're going to wind up with someone who has to edit maybe they weren't at the session. Even if they were, they're not going to remember, depending on if you've done like 500 lines. You need to be note-taking while you're recording. The selects column, the director heard the actor and goes, I like the third one. So you write 6C in selects. Anyway.
We've got this template in the resources as well.
This sheet gets sent to the editor. The editor gets the recording session, which is all the lines being recorded, and they can look at this. An experienced editor looks at this and knows, okay, I'm only editing take 6C, 8A, 9A. And the rest of the takes are still there, but what happens is those lines get cleaned up, edited, mastered, put into the game. And let's say the director's playing the game and they're like, you know, when the guy says you're just adding to the body count, I remember we had a lower energy one, and I think that would feel better in this situation because it feels weird that he's shouting that. No one else is shouting. And we did one where he didn't shout. So you go back, grab 6A. When he didn't shout, get that in, but you don't edit that. Some teams like to edit everything and just have it available. There's kind of different ways to slice it, but the idea is that if you keep organized at the recording, down the line, it's going to save you a lot of time.
So what about once a voice has been recorded? Like, what do you do then in terms of like the tidy up?
So I said editing and mastering. So there's defined processes that a lot of this comes from film and television. But when you take a raw recording of an actor, lots of actors, and it's not even per actor, it's just per session. Sometimes an actor has more noise from their mouth. When you get close to a microphone, there's like clicking and popping that happens. It's really weird. You don't notice it until you really listen with headphones. And when you hear, I was going to bring a before and after example, but I didn't. But there is a lot of work that can go into cleaning up a voice recording. And I hear stuff all the time where someone hasn't done that, and it kind of makes me cringe a little bit. I think a lot of people don't notice it, and it really depends what else is happening in the scene. But for a voiceover especially, it's important, like a narration, and you want to make sure it's nice and clean. Then you also might have T's or S's that get lost, and there's this whole art form of surgically taking pieces of words from other takes and gluing them on. That's a whole other talk. Once that cleaning is done, there is also a mastering process where you want to make sure, like somebody might deliver a sentence and some of the words they dipped in volume, and you want to make sure there's more of a consistent volume, because when those lines get in the game, if you can't actually understand what somebody's saying because they spoke too quietly on one part of the line, then you lose the line, and then the player doesn't hear the message of the story that you want them to get. So mastering is very important because you're basically leveling all of the loudness of all the lines so there's a consistent volume.
Especially if it's come from lots of different studios.
And yeah, when you get into multiple actors with their own studio setups, it becomes even more important to do that because you get different qualities of recordings. That can become a nightmare sometimes, but that's also a whole other talk.
Yes,
so.
and just to add, Peter, we won't get to talk about this, but then we have the opportunity to do a pickup session.
Pickups are important to just use as a safety valve. Let's say you realize, oh my God, we didn't cover this whole chapter of the game. I don't know, just something that you realize while the actor's there that you needed to record. You could try to write those lines while the clock is running and while you're paying somebody an hourly rate. You might have extra time to do that. Sometimes it works out if you get through the script and there's like half an hour left. You might even think of stuff that you didn't know you needed. But the idea is a pickup session should be something I feel like almost any game you should plan. You should build into your budget, into your schedule, that you get your initial dialogue recordings done with the idea that in game development, things can happen where you need to change the whole like structure of parts of your game, and you're going to need voices to change to match that. So you always want to try to, when you're doing the contract as well too, you want to have something on there that allows for the actor to come back, so they know you might need them. The game is shipping in July. We might need you in a month or two before that one more time. So
it's still available. So, I mean, there's so much that we could keep talking about, but we want to open up the floor to some questions as well. But the main thing is we just want to let you know that, we are very much about collaboration. And even though you might be scared of approaching an agent and think it's going to be more expensive or more difficult, I am, like Big Mouth Voices is so totally on board with helping all of you getting voice actors into your games. So, are you successfully using the QR code? And is it coming up with a page? Great. Yay. That QR code is just going to be active over the next week. But then when that link no longer works, it'll still go back onto that Big Mouth drop-down menu under Need Help, because this is information we want to be sharing with all game developers. So we were hoping that it's basically about wanting to provide as many resources for all of you as we can. So thank you very much. We are going to open the floor to questions. And we were just talking about the fact that game development is a pick a path with lots of different paths ahead of you. So enjoy. Who has questions?
Yes, the handsome man at the back. No, they all turned around like that.
Right to the back.
I'm not the other handsome man.
If you had a question, keep your hand up. We're still trying to figure out who it was that he's trying to hand.
He was the handsome man at the back, but it was the other handsome man at the back.
There's more handsome men, and there's a handsome lady there too.
Hi. I just had a question. You briefly touched on things like mouth noise, like specifically that. What are things that a voice actor or a engineer or someone there can help to kind of reduce that and kind of help with the recording, like while it's being taken?
I think it's hard to understand, but I think you're asking about mouth noise and what's a good way to try, what are some methods to try to avoid that? One of the most common ones is the actor eating an apple, believe it or not.
I was going to say, or grapes.
Is a popular one.
Green apple, so basically no coffee before the session, hydration, and a green apple or green grapes can help.
No dairy either.
Can help,
I'll also say if you do.
There are plugins that help can declicks.
Yeah, I mean, the less you need to declick, the better in post. But if you have the option, if you're sitting in a studio and you can listen on headphones during the recording session, you're going to get a more surgical perspective of the voice as maybe players are going to. Whereas if you're at a studio where they have speakers in the room, I really don't like to listen that way because there's acoustics of the room getting in between me and the sound. So
And exerted performances don't go directly into your microphone, go across it. Your microphone as well. Yeah.
Question a mic over here, please. Is the gentleman with their hand up?
Oh, sorry about that.
Thanks, right there. If you can put your hand.
it's halfway towards us here in the middle.
Keep coming. Start moving. This way.
This way.
This way.
Sorry.
Over here.
Over here.
Look at my hand. Look at my hand.
Turn to your.
Turn to your right.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, right. You got it.
Also, regarding mouth noise,
Go down with the microphone.
seasoned actors are going to know ways to address that stuff too. But it's good to call it out when you hear it and see if you can do anything about it.
Yeah, hit us with your question.
Okay, so this is something I still hear. Skyrim was famous for having there was I took an arrow to the knee line that multiple voice actors playing multiple different characters would deliver the same exact line. What do you guys reckon went wrong in the whole process
So they've used one actor to play 3 roles.
It's a problem of scale.
No, they're actually multiple actors playing different characters, but using the same line. And it's like, writing is the cheap bit. How did that happen?
Well, so that goes back to the thing we were talking about when I was talking about how there's AI states, and we're just kind of putting things in for AI states. It's a problem of scale. Skyrim is such a massive, massive game, and they only had X number of dollars to budget to the voices, and they did what they could with it, but I'm aware of what you're talking about completely, and it bothered me too, and I listened to it, and I just go,
They could have avoided it.
if they had more, I know for a fact they have a limited sound team on that crew, and it's a problem of scale, so.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers the question.
It's a great question, though, because it makes you aware of what can you guys do,
Jarring.
even on a limited budget, to avoid that.
Hi, thank you for all the advice. I'm coming from like a smaller team perspective where we do not have like specific voice directors during a recording. And I just want to ask if there's like a bigger writer team, do you prefer to just have one person there to give you direction of like how the voice should play, or is it very distracting if there are more people present?
Could you just?
It's quite hard through the masks actually to hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think the question is about how many people should be at a voice recording session directing. Is that?
Yes. So if there's like more people in a writing team.
So it's funny. The first game company I ever worked at, we actually had a rule. Nobody was really a voice director at this company, but we had a rule that there must be at least 3 members of the team present during voice recordings, and this was to prevent. It was to get the value of having 3 people listening at the same time and being able to talk about what's going on and maybe make a collaborative decision and getting the best results. However, the important thing is that when the 3 people need to talk about stuff, it's sometimes good not to burden the actor with that part of it.
That's exactly where I was going to come from. I
Let
have a
the actor
saying.
have a rest. Say, we'll get right back to you. We're going to talk about what we want you to do next.
Spoil the broth.
But my job as a voice director is actually not sometimes directing, it's actually allowing people to communicate. So I say to the writer, is that the correct pronunciation on that? Is it Baran or Baron? And then I need more clarity now for the voice artist to do that. And sometimes that is important, that some of the writer or the creator of the work is there.
So say, for example, it is a scenario where it's a collaborative process. So 4 of you want to be there because you're all excited about making the game. I guess what we're saying is that's great. Mute the microphone so the voice actor can't hear you. Have a bit of a chat amongst yourselves, but have delegated one person to be the person communicating that direction to the voice actor. And then you might have another person that's keeping note of in the fictionary around making sure that the accent is maintained, not just through the session, but through the part of the game that you recorded in 2020, then you recorded again in 2022 because that character's come back. So it's those sorts of things that you've got to be aware of, but definitely.
And have breaks.
Have breaks.
Yep.
It's been updated on our time. It is 2:22ish. We can keep answering questions till 2:30 because the next people speaking here at 2:40. Do we have any more questions in the room that are near me?
There's
Anyone
one
near
at the
me? Over here, I see one at the front.
2 at the front.
Go down to the front first.
This young lady
mate.
here.
This is ready for you. You might just pull that down just to speak.
So with voice editing and stuff, do you guys have any recommendation on software?
Oh, okay. Cool. There's a couple of options. Yeah.
It's like my favorite question.
Industry standard.
Yeah, so in film and TV, Pro Tools is still the king most of the time. I find issues with it when it comes time to bounce files out for games because there's a lack of ability to do batch type work in Pro Tools. There's ways to do it. There's tricks experienced voice editors use, but another key part of the toolbox would be the Isotope suite of plugins. And that is what I use constantly for cleaning out clicks and getting noises and stuff dealt with. There's spectral sound editing to get rid of weird background stuff.
Can I just add to that? You can sometimes pick up a special deal on the basics of Isotope. For $30 I picked up a suite of 4 or 5 of them. Declick, declip, some other cool things that are some basics as a voiceover artist, but as a studio, you might find that super handy.
Yeah,
And there's little things to be aware of too. Like some voice actors like to default to GarageBand just because they are familiar with it. But the problem with GarageBand is it often has presets. So you're losing the top and the lower frequencies. So that's why I tend to recommend not recording on GarageBand. And then there's editing, like Audacity is free, Adobe Audition is a paid version. That's the one that's quite popular.
That's subscription.
Reaper is another one that a lot of people use.
Yeah, I use Reaper and Pro Tools. The reason I use Pro Tools will tend to be because I need to be interfacing with studios that use Pro Tools. But otherwise, I prefer Reaper. But yes, Adobe Audition is a frequently used voice, especially for voice editing, because it has a lot of great features for automating things that you don't.
But you don't have to be spending lots of money when you're starting out.
There's also a company called Acon Digital that makes a very similar set of plugins to what Isotope does. I feel like I'm advertising for Isotope here, so I should talk about one of the competitors out there, which just came out of nowhere recently, but apparently is very good. I don't have it yet, but I plan to be getting it. Acon, A-C-O-N. Digital, I believe they're Nordic, Scandinavian company.
And there's other things that you can do too, like obviously you can use Zoom to connect with your voice actor, but you can also, from Source Elements, create a free account for Source Connect now, and that allows you to be recording at both ends if you are recording, like if you are in a recording studio or you've got your own recording equipment.
Through Google Chrome.
It only works in Google Chrome, and it's just a free version as opposed to Source Connect, which is the paid version, and Source Connect is generally what you're using if you are at a studio here in Wellington, connecting with another studio, for example, up in Auckland.
But by the way, a lot of actors now have their own Source Connect. So you're not paying for it at their end. You're only paying
One common, I think, I'll call it a misconception about Source Connect is that because you can record with it, that's what you should use. And I tend to not use the power of being able to get the clean recording of the actor on my end of Source Connect is that I can quickly go back and play back what they're recording. Because if I don't have that, I'm just listening over Zoom or Skype or something. And the problem with if I use that actual recording that comes through Source Connect is it's very high quality sounding, but when I do a comparison, if I get the actor to also send me their recording, Source Connect has to do data compression to get the file to come in quickly enough, and you will hear artifacting and differences. And so you definitely want to still try to get the source file from the actor who recorded in those cases.
There's a question over there. Oh, question here and then question there. Yep.
Ngā mihi kia koutou. I just want to say really appreciate all the kōrero on behalf of our Metia team. The rest of them are downstairs with one of our nephews who we were obliged to go and see. He's not that handsome, but he is young. I just want to say thank you to you fellas because everyone up there has given us some really valuable insights into our process, which involves iwi relations and things like that as well. And I look forward to being in touch. But I just want to say how bloody marvellous you all are. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks. Okay, hands up near me and I'll get, there we go.
You, and then you, and then you.
Thanks for the talk, guys.
I'm keeping you fit, Steve.
4 minutes.
It's been really interesting. I just wanted to ask how important it is when you have a scene with 2 actors that you need to get them into the same space for recording, whether or not you can pass the emotion across recording sessions or if it's actually needed that they need to be in the same.
dialogue between the 2 of them?
Yeah.
Yeah, real time. Well, I mean, that can be very, very difficult from an editing point of view. And sometimes we would maybe record them separately, having a conversation with each other. But you have to be very mindful within takes of how you might edit in and out of that. I haven't done a lot of that.
I feel like Gemma and I were talking about this yesterday because from the actor's point of view, it's actually beneficial sometimes to be able to do that. So.
Yeah, totally. There's something that happens organically when you put 2 actors in the same studio because it becomes quite collaborative. And for example, I was working on a mobile phone game where I had to be a zombie and I had a fellow actor. The first and only time this has happened, we're in the same booth and it became really fun because you got to hear another actor. You'd rarely ever get to do that until the game's been released. But also it became a one-upmanship in a really positive way. So, you know, Kevin who's the other fellow voice actor, he'd be doing, you know, and then we had these ideas of what if your body was half chopped off as a zombie and you're crawling towards the player, you know? So what would that sound like? Well, you wouldn't have the breath. You'd be like, like that would be it, you know? So it became the improv, and the audio and sound engineer was just laughing his butt off down the hallway because we started becoming more and more, giving more improvised takes and more options, and it became really fun. So there's an energy that happens when you put 2 actors.
If you're going to make it like a conversation between 2 people, what I would do, and I have done, is put the person in the booth recording them, and I'd just be recording as they're hearing it through their cans.
But the other person in the room.
That's right. So they're getting the emotion that they need, but we've got a clean take so that we can use it.
We now have the next person waiting outside to enter to sit for their setup for their thing. I've been given the hard word, so if I give my last question here, if you have any more, come see us downstairs in the lunch break area and give a 30-second answer, please. Here you go.
Okay.
There we go. All right. First of all, thanks for the talk. It's great. You guys all seem extremely professional, and like you could make things for AAA games, no problem whatsoever.
Oh, thank you.
Right. But gun to your head, you've got to deliver more content than the studio can actually afford to meet your ideal standard. Where do you cut? Is it post? Is it cut? Is it takes? You know, what's the first place to really trim down for budget?
To really trim down the budget. The writing, making sure that you're really succinct in what is going to be recorded. So I think it's going to be in the pre-production. What's the critical information we've got to get across? making sure it's a finite number of lines so that your session can then be a definitive number of hours, and then you're not having to waste more time in editing. So I think it's clarity around the writing in pre-production. Would you guys agree with that?
Yes, and also if you're building a relationship with a recording studio, build it, and therefore we're going to be with you, and therefore you can lock in quite a good rate as well, because they're more than happy to sort of have something that could be ongoing.
Yep.
I think also having a good pipeline for your dialogue from recording to getting into the game, which I was describing a little bit of, the more of that you can get established with temp lines to ensure that you're not burning a lot of cycles figuring it out.
But seriously, we have so many voices that would just love to do any development with any of you on Zoom to get down to those finite number of lines.
You wouldn't believe how helpful we would like to be. And as per our shirt, we love to talk, and hopefully the next speaker isn't too annoyed with us. Thank you so much for coming along.
Everybody.
Come visit us.